started as an office boy in George Abbott's office, and then I moved up. I learned very quickly everything about that empty space and how it works and what you can do in the theater and cannot do. And then, oops, I got drafted. And that was not my master plan at all. Abbott had said, I'll have a job for you when you get back. And he did. I went to work as a stage manager, assistant stage manager on Wonderful Town. It was a hit, huge hit. And standing in the wings, I kept saying to Bobby, why can't we be doing this producing thing as well as they do it? And maybe we can bring something to producing.
I would often want someone to go out on the road and check up on a company that was supposed to be ragged. And I noticed that Hal always got better results than Bobby did. And so I remember telling him that I thought he was a director because of what I saw he had done.
You learn from all your collaborators, and you learn differently from all of them. If you're fortunate enough to work with extremely talented people. I learned from George Abbott a collaboration that really was stimulating would be one in which there was an old hand with a huge amount of experience and young people with no experience but contemporary taste. I think the original idea probably wasn't terribly good. I would not have been that happy with a Jewish boy and a Catholic girl and the difficulties. It had been done. The Jews and Catholics thing is sort of like Abie's Irish Rose or something. I don't know who's fighting who except across the dinner table. It turned into a much more political, historical piece about those times on the West Side. This, of course, was very fresh. It was always our intention that Joel Grey represent Germany. And in the first act, almost up to the last scene in the first act, he is Germany in the depths of the Depression. The Depression in Germany was the worst of anywhere in the world. So he's kind of a tragic entertainer. And so by the end of the first act, they're all singing Tomorrow Belongs to Us, and you think, they don't even know what they're singing yet. By the second act, the man is dancing with gorillas and saying she wouldn't look Jewish at all and all that stuff, and he's gone completely there. Pajama Game was the first show I was lucky enough to be associated with, and I think I rode in on the tail of a lot of people. The next stage was West Side Story, but the next watershed moment was when I did Cabaret, which I directed and produced. And then along the way, I met Kander and Ebb, and Bach and Harnick were wonderful. I even forgot Fiddler on the Roof, which preceded Sondheim, which was 1964, which was an extraordinary show. Then I started to work with Sondheim, 10 years of doing musicals, which were, I guess, quite courageous. We did Company, we did Follies, Pacific Overtures, a little night music. They were really, I think, groundbreaking in terms of not just subject matter, but how they were created. Non-linear musicals without stories, but with character. And Steve could pull that off. When Sondheim writes material, I usually think it's, as good as it gets. Every once in a while, I'll say, is that good? And every once in a while, I'll shake him. And he'll say, maybe, no, not good enough. But just as often, he'll say, Hal, you'll like it.
I had to persuade Hal to do Sweeney Todd. He said, I know what you want. You want a small, scary musical, which is indeed what I wanted. He said, but I could give you something large and maybe epic in size. I gathered that was the only way he would be interested in doing it. And to this effect, he designed a very large show. I knew that one day it could be done small, but I wanted Hal to direct it, so it was fine. Of course, it turned out to be a wonderful, brilliant production. But Hal also professed to not be able to identify with the motive of revenge. He said, for me, it's about the economic and class structure in England. I said, for me, it's about revenge. He said, well, I really don't understand revenge. And I thought, listen, everybody understands revenge, whether you admit it or not.
Oh boy, did we approach Sweeney Todd from different viewpoints, Steve and I. He had seen a version of it in the East End, Joan Littlewood's old theater, and it was funny. And they served meat pies at intermission. That didn't tickle me. I didn't get it. It was a jape, and I didn't want to do a jape. So I politicized it.
You know, the traditional thing of having the music and the orchestra underscore the moments of melodrama. Well, I asked for, because it was a factory, I asked for a factory whistle. It's the most chilling sound. You'll hear it, and it's quite alarming. The first time it goes off is right at the beginning of the show, and it has the effect of scaring the hell out of the audience. And you hear a terrible scream from a dozen people in the house, and then we get on with the show.
It was a hit immediately, but it ran out of an audience after a year and a half because people would say to people, "You've got to see Sweeney Todd," and then people would say, "What's it about?" And they'd say, "Well, it's about cannibalism, really. It's about," or whatever. And people would say, "You couldn't drag me in to see that show." And I suspect that that's probably responsible for how wonderfully it's always received, but how ultimately its audience is somewhat limited. Most of the work that I'm associated with, the shows have not been the biggest hits of the season. They've been very often celebrated for some artistic component. The show back there on the wall is a show that I did in 1971 that at that time was the most expensive musical ever done, $800,000. It had 600 costumes, and it was huge. It never paid back its investment. That show represents one of my favorite shows, and it lost all its money. Most of the shows that I've done have not been anticipated with any excitement before they opened. They've had minimal advances generally, and there's a lot of, why are you doing that subject, what interests you about that, and so on. I've always thought that when you have a sense of what a theater piece is going to be, a real strong sense of anticipation of what you think it will be, you will disappoint people because your vision is different from theirs. My wife defined everything. She said, I wish to hell you would stop equating success with box office receipts. You have had successes that failed at the box office, and you have had hits that you really don't care that much for. So there are hits and flops, and there are successes and failures. And then there's the moment that exists on every project I've ever done that was any good, and that's halfway through it, I think it's never going to get done. I know it's never going to get done. And then I wake up one morning persistent again, and then it gets to the stage. But there's always a moment with all the valuable stuff where I think it's never going to happen. You just worked every year, and you could, and you were encouraged by producers to do it. But the price was so different. You could do a musical for $250,000 or less. Damn Yankees cost $162,000 of a $250,000 budget. Full scenery, costumes, the works. Now you're talking $10 million. So it's really hard. So where do those young artists cut their eye teeth? Where do they keep growing? How is that opportunity available to them. Somebody's going to have to come up who was my age all those years ago and reinvent the wheel. And certainly there are bright kids who can do that, but they're going to have to fight through a lot of things that are now conventionally accepted. Because we're spending so much money, we now must bring demographics into it and decide what our project will be based on its potential. You know, we live in a poll-ridden society. You've just seen it on television with politics. Well, that's what demographics are. What do they want to see?
Who is the auctioneer? You're very good. You're really swell, which is always what precedes a note. Absolutely, what you're doing is what I've always wanted to be done, that strange sense of imminent danger. Small but important point. In Music of the Night, when you're downstage and you put your hand up to his mask, don't recoil. It's exactly the opposite. It's sensual. And that's what's so sick weird about it. Get into it. It's, you know, the girl's enthralled. Just experiencing something you don't understand that's very compelling and kind of bubbling up in your whole nature. So I don't know what this is, but that's what I have to see, somebody transported that way. One note, you'll be happy to know, was for you, and I can't read it. So continue to give your usual performance. I thought the show was too loud. Judy Prince said, "You're not going to tell them it's loud, are you?" And this is my wife. And I said, yes. She said, "Oh, I love when it's loud." But, you know, that's her problem. And, right from the first rehearsal, we chose to have strange elisions between scenes. The cadence of the show is never predictable. In every single scene, something that you don't expect happens. That's what I think propels the story so well, and what I think is the gold that's mined in the show, and why we're still here. It's a show where it works because we never, ever let up. I'll see you soon, and thanks a lot, guys. You're well.
I didn't do Phantom of the Opera to achieve the greatest financial success, perhaps, of all time. That was not an impulse. It just happened. Are the old character actors up here? No. This is the old character actors room. Hello. Hi.
We're just getting younger by the minute.
Yes, I know that. I had two character actors playing those parts, and they after something like 18 years, it just seemed they were bored. And so everybody said, "Don't you think that maybe it's bye-bye time?" And I said, "No, I want to think about it, because they're great favorites of mine." And the next day I said, "I know what I'm going to do," and I had them switch roles. We're going strong at 20 years in New York, and we're doing 95% capacity. Who knows how long it will run? It's played in about 17 countries. At one point, a year or two ago, it played to over 100 million people. There are new productions planned in Argentina. There's a production reopening in Copenhagen after a number of years. And there's a production in Las Vegas. Almost never have I tried to calculate what the public wants. And the rare occasion when I have, I've regretted it. What I try to do is feed my own need as a theater goer, as well as somebody who works in the theater. I want to see something on the stage that I have not seen. In the theater, you have to let the imagination of the audience supply something which they don't supply in films. The film is there for you. The television show is there. You are not complicitous in the creation of a piece of work.
When you're in a theater and people are speaking from the stage, you sit more on the edge of your seat. You fill in blanks. All of that excites the imagination and makes you, as a member of the audience, contribute. Hence, you're kind of a collaborator. If you don't like what you see, the actors on stage know it. Your response affects their performance. So every night, a performance is a little bit different based on the audience's response. Theater is responsible for the quality of your life in art. It triggers your curiosity. You don't take a film very often in as much as a really rich theatrical experience.
I don't want to seem disingenuous, but I have to say, I never came into this business to get rich. I've done very well following my own artistic instincts. That's luck. I was not born so avant-garde that I have lived the life of a starving artist, but I was born with taste and with nerve and enough courage to want to do quality work and do some of it myself. And I've been lucky enough to fit in that slot where my work has an audience. I can't sing and I can't act, so this is what I've done with my life.